guys. So generally, I'd say I get a fair amount of questions. Some of the time they kind of end up being very similar, so I figured it'd be best to answer it on YouTube and stuff. Place, a little more digestible rather than an article that would just disappear into the ether. That way I really don't have to repeat myself 50,000 times, and it's useful stuff. So this question set in particular I received from one person is kind of mostly pertaining to training mode and retention, like memory retention, physical retention, and stuff like that. So, I thought it'd be really good to talk about. It's kind of like a longer form thing. So there's going to be a lot of B-roll footage, a lot of script reading, but yeah, hopefully it's good stuff. Let me get right into it. All right. Nice, Microsoft Word. Let's go. So when it comes to time distribution during practice, I wonder in general how much time you spend in the lab in comparison to other aspects of improvement, matches, study, etc. This ties a lot into the memory retention question that I plan to ask, because sometimes I think I lab monster too hard, to the point where I don't always remember all the counterplay and things I practice immediately, but sometimes after it occurs. I'd love to get your thoughts on how you allocate your time between these things, as well as how much time you generally spend on each, and if it differs based on games. Like, do you lab CF harder than a game such as Granblue? Yes. For reference, I tend to focus very hard on neutral interactions in training mode by studying matchup move spacing and reward based on our respective positions, plus labbing out defensive counterplay. I've been feeling like I may possibly be fixating way too hard on studying the neutral interactions in there, and should probably direct more of my time towards figuring out set interactions through trial and error done in matches. Lastly, when it comes to memory retention for counterplay and tech, how do you attempt to apply it so efficiently? Do you fixate hard on putting yourself in those instances which you're looking to drill at the cost of paying less attention to how the opponent is structuring their neutral and pressure? Or do you typically just focus on their intentions like normal and see how their intentions lead into those respective options? Granted, that is from a defensive standpoint in terms of application, but I wonder if your approach to this thinking is the same when you apply pressure or neutral concepts too. So yes, this last part, yes, I will be talking about everything. This is kind of a more general approach to this kind of deal. So, pretty lengthy, right? Pretty substantial. I'm definitely going to jump around a bit to try to make a more cohesive point, since there are a few relevant pieces scattered around. Forgive me if I kind of twist some words, but there are a few things that I'd like to spin a bit to make a point. This is so important. This is probably what I'd like to focus on the most, as I think this is one of the core aspects of efficient retention. Before I get into that, to kind of take a step back and put a bit of perspective on things, when we talk about labbing, I think we usually refer to things for increasing knowledge, things like move properties or context abstraction. This is generally a pretty finite thing depending on the game, but it can also change pretty wildly based on the assumptions you're making from your prior game knowledge. So knowing something new or having a new perspective can change how you'd interpret a situation pretty wildly. This can end up being a pretty big time sink, and time is the big idea here. Optimizing the time you spend on the game means faster improvement too, and I'm sure it is a concern here because all of this is relating to time investment, right? As a result, I'd like to shift the focus of my training mode discussion to the actual aspect of training. To go back to the idea of fixating hard in matches for specific contexts, like 100%, like 1,000%, yeah. I've literally been doing this for the past 10 years, and I think it's one of the fastest ways to actually integrate things in your gameplay. Of course, I'm not just saying, sit there and try to tech the throw, and that's the only thing you should do. But at least try to play in a natural way that could facilitate that kind of thing, or at least banks on it in some form, right? This is exactly what casuals and general play is for. Integration is the end goal of all these things, right? So practice matches so much more easily imitate the kind of, state that you want to be in and the kind of end result you want to be in. So generally, if you could practice in matches, it's a great idea. You'll much more easily transition into seamless comfort that way, right? Kind of getting into the idea of comfort and transitioning into things in matches. This, not tooting my own horn, I think this is a good example. Oh god, Blaze Blue. Right? Of course. So talking about comfort, this kind of defensive reaction stuff is something that I've been working on for a really long time. What's significant about this is a lot of the context surrounding. I think one of the big things about this set in particular, this is a 60-minute set, that really stands out to me is like the level of comfort that is kind of displayed here, right? A lot of things that people are just like, yep, this is unreactable, you can't block this, right? But it's something that I've kind of like trained myself to do and been able to apply it. But what's significant about this set in particular is not only that I can do it, right? It's more that I'm using this to practice, right? We've used this term like passive focus. It takes a pretty high degree of comfort. And, you know, I'm at my homie's house playing my boy at 3 in the morning with a hot cup of coffee, a little bit of drink. It's all good. Like, I'm very comfortable. I'm clearly focusing on wagering reactions in a lot of situations where perhaps I could commit to something else. But this definitely served as like excellent practice, right? The entire point of this defensive banking is because it provides a better overall risk reward in certain situations. But to get to this point, training mode was like super necessary for the building blocks and exploring the ideas. So as you can see, they tend to work in tandem for retaining something and turning it into something match ready, because this is, I would say, a practice match. Man, my defense is ridiculous. So back to the doc, right? Here we go. For reference, I generally tend to focus very hard on neutral interactions in training mode by studying matchup move spacing and reward based on respective positions plus laying out defensive counterplay. Okay. So there are a lot of knowledge-based contexts that you should explore, but these things can end up being pretty arbitrary. Regardless, the base concepts that you should focus on to really optimize your time are more like property-based and less assumptive. So the more you extrapolate, right, the more you run the risk of coming up with a faulty idea. So the stronger your basis is, the further you can correctly abstract situations. So I said that to say the better you are at playing the game, the more useful your knowledge returns will be when you actually do explore. But you need context to improve on to practice in the first place, right? You're practicing the process of getting better using knowledge. So it kind of becomes a circular thing. I'd definitely like for you to think of training mode as a tool for your actual training mode, which is the time you're spending sitting down and investing your focus into the game. Playing practice matches is also, you know, your training mode, stuff like that. Now that I've fleshed out those things a bit, I'll try to answer the questions a bit more specifically. So here we go to time distribution during practice, right? So now that I've put this kind of crazy connotation on the word labbing, as far as training mode knowledge exploration goes, I spend a lot of time figuring out constraints and properties. These things are mainly just like building blocks, but sometimes there's a lot to go through. So like this varies a lot by the game, so I spend a lot more time in CF training mode exploring things like that than like Granblue, right? There are just more relevant properties to think about or attach a face to a name in a game like CF than Granblue, where a lot of things are like super straightforward, right? Just very intuitive, easy to understand. I guess like speaking of like easy to understand, right? This kind of thing generally determines how much you'd want to split application practice time in training mode and application practice time in matches. For Granblue, there's not a lot of knowledge to explore beyond like, is this possible? Or getting an idea of how long something would take, right? So overall, I don't really want to give a specific number for like time distribution because it's a by need process and it changes depending on the game and what situations you're dealing with, even what character you're playing, right? What you're really practicing this whole time is the process of exploring, concluding, attempting, applying, right? Once the specific thing becomes comfortable, then it ends up being retention, right? The more you do it, the more purposefully you play your matches, you'll end up with a lot more information and feedback to work with. A lot of ideas get retained there, right? Eventually, your game sense can get to the point where if you have a question or idea that you want to explore, you might not even need to boot up training mode. You can just try it in matches. Your turnaround time is going to be a lot faster overall in the long run. In a game like Granblue, like if you know, in a game like Granblue, you'll hit that point where you don't really quote unquote like need training mode as much. You can pretty feasibly start to ask and answer questions mid-match a lot better because tool interactions are pretty intuitive, right? A big thing I'd like to mention as well is match videos, right? So when I see study, I think of match videos. A big thing I'd like to mention around match videos, I think retention from watching videos in general is pretty poor. So you should aim for big ideas in videos, you know, general direction and stuff for your exploration rather than seeking contextual answers. A lot of the time, if you have the questions or didn't think about it yourself, there's likely some extra context hidden there that, unless it's immediately obvious to you, probably includes some understanding that you don't have, right? So beyond watching your own matches and seeing where you made mistakes, I wouldn't really prioritize watching too many match videos. Like, watching some stronger players is good for general content for your head to work with. You generally do want to focus on playing and training yourself, for sure. It's such a big part of fighting games. I hardly ever watch my own matches because I generally know what goes on, like where I made mistakes and stuff pretty quickly. Not that that's what you should do, but I'm just saying eventually, if you can judge these things on the fly, you'll be able to act and improve on them much faster. So you can kind of repeat the cycle a lot faster. You just get so much better at it, right? In total, what you're really practicing is that whole process of what you need to do in order to retain something, right? Just by going through the motions enough times and making this the focus point of your time spent playing the game, whether it be in training mode or matches, you'll have an easier time quickly applying things, even like remembering stuff from your matches, right? So overall, relating to this, I think biting off more than you can chew is fine. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing to have a lot on your plate. Like, you have to work through it piece by piece until it all becomes relevant anyway, right? Otherwise, there's not much point to it. So even if you're dealing with a lot at a time, it's still a work in progress thing. I wouldn't really avoid it too much. So if you have like the itch to explore, go and explore, you know? It's definitely something where having fun, being comfortable with this kind of thing helps so much. So if you want to do it, go do it, but make sure that your focus and what you want is to make this worthwhile in matches, right? If that's your end goal and that's what you're asking about, then make sure that you do that, right? How do you accomplish that? Hopefully I can give you the idea. Yeah, I think that about sums up my response to this. Hopefully it was clear enough. If you have any more questions or something, you know, just leave comments, Twitter DM. It's all good. I definitely love to answer more questions. You know, give me a variety. Hopefully I can talk about something different. Hit the sub, drop the like, you know, leave my video running so that I get those extra minutes watched so that I could apply for YouTube Partner and then run some ads on this video. You know, that'd be sick, right? All right, hell yeah. All right, I'll catch you later. Thanks.